Welcome to Travel All Over the Countryside. We're at Hancock's Lookout in the Flinders Ranges in South Australia. Spencer's Golf is down there, and just a bit north is Port Augusta, the gateway to the outback. We're going to travel to Alice Springs the old way, following the footsteps of the early explorers, the early settlers, the Afghan camel teams and the old Ghan Railway. We're going to travel the tracks of the past. Travel with us as we ride the old Ghan train. See colourful flowers and animals of the desert. Meet some of the friendly locals. Cross the bridge to nowhere. Take an outback bath and a natural spa. Visit a real inland sea. Experience a desert flood before watching the sunset on this remote pinnacle of the centre. All this and much more as we travel the tracks of the past. Port Augusta was the start point of many expeditions north, including the beginning of the old Ghan line to the centre. It's also our starting point. Our route north is steeped in history and it's a great four-wheel drive journey. After you leave Port Augusta, you head up through Pitchie Pass towards Quorn. On the side of the road you'll notice the old railway line. That's part of the old Ghan line. And in fact you can still take a ride on that part of the line if you go to Quorn and take the Pitchie Railway. The Pitchie Railway Preservation Society operates a railway at Quorn. It's the home of the old Ghan. A large restoration workshop is dedicated to restoring trains and rolling stock.
This is an NM class, number 25, that used to run up to Alice Springs from Quorn, and we hope one day to completely restore it.
The Society's aim is to preserve the narrow gauge railway through Pitchie Pass, and in doing so, they've saved a unique piece of South Australian heritage. The railway is crewed by a dedicated group of volunteers who use their spare time giving passengers a taste of what it was like to ride on the old Ghan train. It's one of the most popular tourist attractions in the region. The Society regularly runs a steam train, but today we're on board the historic rail car. In 1879, when the railway was built through the pass, the town of Pitchie had two breweries, a hotel and a few houses. It was an important stopping off point for teamsters heading north, until the railway took away their business. Today the remaining buildings serve as a house and a restaurant for passing travellers. The railway line through Pitchie Pass to Quorn is recognised as the oldest and most scenic part of the Great Northern Railway, and it's the only part of the old Ghan line in use that's left in South Australia. As we sway gently in the carriages, it's easy to imagine we're back in time, heading to Alice Springs on the old Ghan train. It's a great feeling. Back to reality, it's time for us to continue our travels to Alice Springs. We're taking a sidetrack to visit an artist who lives on a property high on a ridge overlooking the Willochra Plains. Travellers are welcome to pop in and see Val Francis at work. Val's been painting for 30 years.
I still call it a hobby job. I grew up 5 miles south of Quorn.
Oh right, oh well.
And it was even a dry, droughty area than this. I think growing up where I did was good. Taught me to be resourceful.
Well, it does, doesn't it, living on the land?
And very careful and have the knowledge of the land.
Val paints local scenery and scenes of old ruins along the old Ghan line. They give us a taste of what to expect further north. Before we go, Val invites us to visit a lookout on the property that has a magnificent view over the Willochra Plains.
But it's grand, isn't it? I never get tired looking at that view. Good country to live in. Providing you get the rain.
Recent rain has greened the country. The explorers, settlers, camel teams and the old Ghan line all crossed the Willochra Plains, heading to points north as they opened up the inland. We're also heading north and taking in some of the southern Flinders Ranges scenery that Val loves to paint. This is Warren Gorge. The Flinders Ranges are one of the most ancient landscapes on Earth, dating back 1,600 million years. All this was then under the sea. Forces of nature have uplifted and sculptured the ancient rocks, creating some spectacular scenery. As you're driving along the road to Hawker, you can see evidence of the old Ghan line right beside the road, such as this old bridge here that crossed the creek. The railway line went across there, but of course that's gone now. The timber's collapsed here, but you can see this magnificent stonework that's still standing. Only metres away we see some of nature's stonework. It looks like a fossilised animal from the Dreamtime, which is significant to this area. This large rock here is beside Kanyaka Waterhole. Kanyaka in Aboriginal means piece of rock. This large piece of rock in fact was called Death Rock, and legend has it that when an Aboriginal person was about to die, they'd bring them here and place them in the shadow of the rock so they could die in peace. A short walk from Death Rock brings us to the ruins of old Kanyaka Station. Settled in 1849 near the permanent spring-fed Kanyaka Waterhole, it was abandoned after severe droughts in the 1860s. Kanyaka is a reminder that life wasn't easy for the pioneers of the area. As you walk through the historic ruins of old Kanyaka Station, it's hard to believe there are 70 families living here, and in its heyday in the early 1800s, they sheared up to 40,000 sheep. Half an hour's drive brings us to Hawker, where we stock up and take a look at the old railway complex, which closed in 1956. We've just left Hawker, and we're on a bitumen road, which is lucky because it's raining out there now. We're heading up towards Parachilna and on to Oodnadatta. I just hope the rain stops before we get onto the dirt part of the road up there. If not, well, hopefully we can still get through. Just over 100 kilometres north, the sun comes out and we turn east to the historical township of Beltana. Blizzards are common in this area, and we stop to usher this one off the road. This is a member of the skink family and has many names including stumpy tail, bobtail, shingleback and sleepy lizard. Take your pick. Beltana is a historic site along our tracks of the past. It was once a major camel breeding station, a railway town and the site of a repeater station for the overland telegraph line, as well as the base for the famous pastoralists Thomas Elder and Robert Barr Smith of Elder Smith and Company. Today the buildings are privately owned and have been restored for use as holiday hideaways. It's day 4 and we're heading north on the dirt bypass road through Beltana. Travellers using this route pass through some striking scenery. It also follows the route of the old Ghan line, which is evident by roadside ruins. After our detour to Beltana, we're enjoying our last section of sealed road, which ends at Lyndhurst. It's the last we'll travel on until we reach Alice Springs, about 2,000 kilometres away, as we follow the tracks of the past. There's not much at Lyndhurst, but you can stock up on fuel and some supplies. But don't go through Lyndhurst without meeting its most famous citizen. He only lives a couple of kilometres east of town. You can call in any day from sunup to sundown, and if he's home, it's well worth the visit. He's a true character of the Australian outback, and some of his mates are just as outspoken. We're here to talk to, or should I say listen to, Cornelius Johann Alpha Rink, better known as Talc Alf, sculptor of Talc rock extraordinaire. What is it you're making there, Alf?
Well, this is a trophy for the golf tournament in William Creek next month to raise money for the Flying Doctor. And seeing it's all about golf, I thought I'd put the white shark trophy. So there's the shark there, and there's the head, and there's the golf stick, and there's the eye on the ball.
There are hours of work involved in this unusual form of sculpture.
But the main sort of thing with this carving is to get the final scratches out and use steel wool. So you've got to keep scraping it off. That takes the most time. So the person's head there and then I'll spirit of the shark behind it and go for the kill.
How long have you been doing this with the talc?
Oh, about 22 years now. Yeah. Started 22 years ago at Lyndhurst to make a living out of it.
This unique talc art is carved from talc rock that's quarried not far from Lyndhurst in the northern Flinders Ranges, Australia's only talc mine. Some of these must weigh a bit, those really big ones.
Oh, yeah. That one there's pushing the wheel along.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The mated kangaroo. Yeah. Mated kangaroo.
They feel nice, don't they?
Yeah.
Because they're thin.
Yeah. Just the mother and the child there.
How many do you reckon you've made altogether?
Oh, I lose track of them, you know. Those little ones there, like I make a few a day, and I thought at least one a day over the 20 years, and that's how many carvers around.
By my calculations, that's about 8,000 Talc Alf originals somewhere around the world, but they're not all for sale. Some in this collection are special and cannot be bought at any price. Talc Alf's not a material man. The simple things in life matter more to him. Talc Alf's art reflects his unique outlook on life. Just mention the alphabet or boomerangs, then sit back and listen.
Now, the boomerang should be recognised as the beginning of flight to the stars. When the Aboriginals of Australia designed boomerangs, I reckon they designed it to hunt the kangaroos for bush tucker, so they shaped the throwing stick to the same shape as the legs. And to prove the kangaroo connection to the making of boomerangs is the name boomerang itself. When the kangaroo jumps along, it goes boom, 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 and the big fellas are called boomers. So the Aborigines called that hunting stick the boomerang to throw at the boomers. And they got that good at making that throwing stick over the thousands of years, they even made it come back. So it's the first time in the world the human mind made a flying wing aerodynamically and got it to come back. And that's truly Australian made.
Talc Alf's pets are as unusual as his theories. In days gone by, camels in Lyndhurst were beasts of burden that carried supplies from the railway to the outlying station properties. That was in the late 1880s. Today, Alf has an old Land Rover for transport, but says he loves to ride his camels in the desert hills. It helps inspire his theories and artworks. Alf's wife Daisy is showing Margie how traditional Aboriginal necklaces are made from bush seeds.
So what I'm doing, I put the red gum nuts, petals, they call it nuts, are going through. And then I have to count it how much I have to put it in. And put the Quandong seeds to hold them back, and then thread another lot.
I like those natural colours the best.
Just naturally, yeah, that's what I mean. The little ones that I put it on now, they're the same, but when they push petal coming out, they throw the little ones out. This is very interesting to look, when the trees are blooming. And the second bloom come that big.
Oh, the bigger one?
Yeah.
Right.
It's one gum doing these different things.
One tree?
Yeah. Yeah, this is how they finish. This is just the gums.
Even though Daisy comes from the Torres Strait Islands, she has a personal interest in Aboriginal culture and shows Margie the source of the nuts.
If we got another rain, it's going to fill up. See how the part ones up there, the real big ones?
Yes.
That's when the water get into them, and they get real bigger. And the little ones, they're not ready yet. They're red, but they're not ready until the rain comes on.
Those big fat ones up there.
The big ones, because we just started lately rainy last weekend. You got to open it with your hands, and that's where the nut is. See it inside?
The nuts are useful in traditional craft, and the flesh of the quandong makes a delicious wild peach jam. Handy to know if you're out in the bush. Walking through here is almost like walking through a rainbow. A kaleidoscope of colours dazzle the eyes. This is a unique heritage site, and one not to be missed if you're travelling this way. These are the Aboriginal ochre pits just north of Lyndhurst. Over the years, the Aboriginal tribes took ochre out of here for ceremonial purposes and for paintings. And in fact, they did allow other tribes in here from all around the area to come and dig in this one ochre pit. They had a sort of treaty going because it was one of the only ochre pits in the area. Amazing to think they dug all this out by hand. Probably started out as a bit of a gully. They found some ochre and then just expanded on that. There's been no machinery in here, just hand digging of the ochre. Over many thousands of years, tens of thousands of tonnes of ochre have been removed from this huge quarry by the early inhabitants of the area. Ochre pigments were a prized commodity for painting artefacts and body decorations for corroborees. Ochre from here was traded for pearl shells from the northwest coast. It was also traded with people in Arnhem Land and further east, along recognised trade routes that linked all points north. The original tracks of the past were made by the bare feet of Aboriginal tribes trading special commodities like this top quality ochre. Travelling north from Lyndhurst and the ochre pits, the country becomes more desolate as we drive beside the disused old Ghan Railway. The faded sign says watch out for trains. We needn't worry, it's many years since a train stopped at Farina, a genuine Australian ghost town. Farina was abandoned in the late 1960s. It was later stripped of anything useful, such as roofing iron and building stones. Also, many curious travellers took mementos with them as they passed through, reducing the town to a few remaining shells of former houses and business premises. This desolate ghost town is a must-see if you're heading north. It has an eerie feel about it, and to us it's somewhat reminiscent of the ghost towns in the deserts for the American Wild West. This is part of the ruins of Farina. This is what's left of the old Transcontinental Hotel. Farina in its heyday had about 600 population. And in fact, the word Farina means flower in Latin, because around this area here they thought it would be a good wheat growing area, but that proved to be wrong. Farina was originally called Government Gums, as a waterhole in a nearby creek served as a stopping off point for stock heading into the northern parts of South Australia. It then became a construction camp for the overland telegraph line that was to cross Australia. The township of Farina was surveyed in 1878 for enthusiastic farmers who expected to grow wheat in the surrounding red soil. A couple of good years of rain gave false hope to the farmers. Many years of drought followed and dashed any hope of wheat fields around Farina. The railway came in 1882 and Farina became a distribution centre for goods brought in by train. Today's visitors must bring their own supplies to Farina, as the facilities here are very limited. The only bath you're likely to get at Farina is a sun bath. In its heyday, Farina had stockyards, a general store, a post office, a saddlery, a brewery, 2 hotels and an underground bakery. No flour was ever shipped out of Farina, so it seems ironical today that the best preserved building in the ghost town is the underground bakery. It makes us wonder how many loaves of bread were baked here. The poor old bakers working here would have been subjected to extreme heats in the summer months, where the temperatures soared up into the high 40s. We presume they survived the heat, and the town survived for 90 years despite the lack of wheat farming. If you are lucky enough to visit Farina and experience the feelings of the past, please just take photos and leave this ghost town to its ghosts. There is a good campsite down by the riverbed at Farina, but we decide to head on to Marree, the town that stole Farina's lifeblood. The railway pushed on the extra 54 kilometres to Marree only a few years after it reached Farina. Marree then became the new centre for trade in the area. Well, we're at Marree and this is the train that's going nowhere. One of the old Ghan trains, not one of the steam ones, one of the later diesel ones, but it's had it now, just sitting here. Can't go anywhere because there's no line. Line ends right here. Last of the Ghan trains. The last train left Marree in 1981. The only way out for these old trains would be on the back of a semi-trailer, so it seems they're destined to rust away here as a reminder of Marree's glory days as a railway town. The overland telegraph line also passed through Marree on its way across Australia. There's little left to show its passing. Camels also played a major part in Marree's history. And today, if you've lost your watch, don't despair, just duck down to the Camel Clock in the main street. It's built from railway sleepers and serves as a memorial to the camel teams. And if the sun's out, this clever sundial will tell you the time.
Well, the shadow's showing here 7:30, but it's really 5 o'clock. Maybe the camel's moved. He's sitting in the wrong spot.
Whatever the time it is, it's late enough to set up camp in the caravan park, which is just as barren as the surrounding country. Day 5, it's overcast and it's cooler as we set out on our own town tour of Marree. For nearly 100 years, Marree was the hub of South Australia's expanding pastoral areas, and in its heyday had a population of around 600, the same as Farina. It was a change of gauge station on the Ghan line to Alice Springs. The Afghan Express or Ghan train was named after the Afghan cameleers that carried freight from the trains to the remote regions north, east and west of here. The camel teams were operated from the 1880s and almost exclusively by Afghan merchants and cameleers. Up to 1,500 camels operated out of Marree in 1910. Marree Cemetery has many Afghan graves. It's worth a visit to see part of this area's unique link with the Afghans. This section at the cemetery at Marree is where the Afghans were buried, and they're all facing the same way because they were buried facing Mecca. The Afghans lived in Ghan towns on the edge of town and married mostly European widows, deserted wives, Aboriginal women and sometimes ex-prostitutes. They brought no women with them to Australia. Being Muslims, their faith allowed them more than one wife. and most had a wife back in their mother countries of Afghanistan and the northwest provinces of India. It seems ironical that the train that took their name eventually provided railway sleepers to mark most of their graves. Most of the Afghans have gone, and so have the trains. During its construction, the railway also took the lives of a number of workers. The tracks of the past certainly have a checkered history. We've just stopped for a sandwich, and out of nowhere this emu appears. It makes getting lunch a bit difficult.
Hey, you eat that first. You're not getting any more till you're finished.
Margie's no competition for this over-friendly emu.
Come on. Oh, you're cheeky bugger.
The town's full of big birds. This Brolga thinks he owns a fuel pump as we stock up with diesel and provisions for our travels up the lonely Oodnadatta Track. We're just north of Marree, about 1 kilometre. This is where the track ends. It does actually run through the town. There's none at the other side of the town, just a piece through the town there. Ahead of us here, no more track until we get to Alice Springs. All that's left is just the mound where the track was. Ahead lies Oodnadatta, some fascinating mound springs, and the best campsite on the track, at a real desert oasis. This is the famous Oodnadatta Track, and along with the Birdsville and Strzelecki tracks, it's on almost every four-wheel drive owner's list of must-do tracks of South Australia. As you can see, it's more a gravel road than a track, but it can be impassable after rain, so it pays to check with the locals before leaving Marree. The Oodnadatta Track passes through some barren country and follows closely in the footsteps of explorer John McDowell Stewart as he crossed the continent from south to north in 1862. Even in this dry, desolate country, recent rain has prompted the growth of small, delicate flowers, including this white paper daisy that's common in inland arid areas. The rare pincushion plant with its soft pink flowers only grows after rain, and we're lucky to see them in abundance. This arid region has colour in many forms. A bright yellow patch beside the track catches our eye, so we stop to investigate. All this bright yellow colouring here is actually sulphur. It's the only sulphur springs in the area around here, and it's between Pigeon Hill, which is over this way, and Hermit Hill, which is over that way. Right between the two runs the old railway track and the embankment there, and this is all running out of the embankment. It is the only sulphur springs in the whole area. This looks more like areas of New Zealand than an arid region of South Australia. That's because sulphur is found in rocks around volcanoes, but it's also found around hot springs, such as here. It's a non-metallic mineral which is used in paper making and is a source of sulphuric acid, so it's also corrosive. This sulphur spring provides an unusual diversion as we travel the Oodnadatta Track. Not far up the track, we drive past the remains of the rail bridge over Gregory Creek. When it's flowing, Gregory Creek runs into Lake Eyre south, which is visible from the track. Water covers the salt, making Lake Eyre an inland sea, a rare sight we soon plan to investigate. 20 kilometres up the track, we arrive at Kurdimurka siding. The old siding's been restored by the Ghan Railway Preservation Society of South Australia. They hold the Kurdimurka Outback Ball here every 2 years, a top quality black tie event which attracts up to 3,500 people. We're about a year too late, or is that a year too early? Right place, wrong year. So there's nothing to do but pack up the black tie and ball gown and head on up the track. Flat-topped Hamilton Hill is an extinct mound spring, which is close to some very active and spectacular mound springs in the Wombakadabu Conservation Park, just west of the Oodnadatta Track. The mounds are visible from a long distance in the flat, otherwise featureless landscape. Once thought to be volcanic cones, these large mounds were formed from an accumulation of dissolved salt deposits combined with sand. This is Blanche Cup, a spectacular feature in the park. The tracks of the past were made possible by these unique springs that are scattered throughout the region. They're fed by water from the Great Artesian Basin that lies beneath the deserts of 4 states of Australia, the largest underground water basin in the world. These springs were a haven for Aborigines who inhabited the area for centuries. They also made it possible for European settlers to exist in the parched interior. A boardwalk protects the delicate area leading to the most unusual spring, simply called the Bubbler. What looks smooth and gentle suddenly erupts into swirling sand and water mixed with small volcanoes of sand-laden air bubbles. Aboriginal tribes that lived in the area believed the movement in the bubbler is caused by the writhing of a snake killed by their ancestors. We can easily see how that story began as we stare almost transfixed at the surging water, waiting for the snake to emerge. The Aboriginals also believed that Blanche Cup was the cooking pot for the ancestral snake. The runoff from the mound springs has created a lush wetland area, covered in greenery not normally seen in such dry areas. The salt pans are now marshlands near the overflow, attracting migratory birds and helping smaller local birds to survive in the area. This must have been an amazing discovery for the early pioneers who trekked miles through barren landscapes and dry salt pans to reach this far north. A short distance north brings us to Coward Springs, a real oasis for travellers. The shade is provided by date palms planted by Afghan cameleers in the 1800s. A hot shower in an unusual shower block, built almost entirely from the old Ghan Railway sleepers, is provided by Greg Emmett, the lessee of 30 hectares of land taking in Coward Springs. Greg is a builder, so he soon recognised the potential of the free material lying beside the old Ghan line and built amenities for the most unusual camping ground in South Australia. And what's this hidden behind the bushes?
Well, at Coward Springs you can actually have a bath or a spa bath. In fact, this is a natural spa bath coming from the springs back there, and it's lovely and warm. Great after a hot day on the road in the dust. It's even got its own jet here. Great at the back. Been built out of sleepers from the old Ghan Railway line. Save us the toilets and shower block. Good idea actually, looks quite good.
Coward Springs was also a railway siding before the line was closed. Today we reckon it's the best camping ground along the track. It's a favourite with travellers who make the effort to pull up and check out this little patch of history. Coward Springs siding was quite a community with fettlers' cottages and its own pub. The camping fees at Coward Springs go into improving and restoring the old buildings that remain here. It's a worthy cause that's helping to save some of our heritage on the tracks of the past. We continue further north to visit a pink inland sea. It's dusty and a hot 30 degrees as we drive 24 kilometres up the Oodnadatta Track from Coward Springs to Beresford Siding. The rusting remains of the water softener and storage tank make Beresford Siding easy to find. A flowing bore here feeds this dam with a constant supply of water. We're a very long way from the sea, so it comes as a surprise to see pelicans in an arid desert. But any permanent water in these regions attracts birds and even pelicans. A flock of cormorants are having a ducking good time in the large dam, which was originally built to supply water for the steam trains on the old Ghan line. Another 45 kilometres and we're at the turn-off to Lake Eyre north. A makeshift sign warns us this track is remote and not to travel this way if you're not fully prepared and have four-wheel drive experience. About 3/4 of the way to the lake, the sandy station track enters some very unusual country that's scattered with patches of what looks like truckloads of broken glass.
We're driving along the road out to Lake Eyre. Noticed all this stuff shining over beside the road, and it's this here. It looks like glass, but it's not actually glass at all. is gypsum crystals. Sounds a bit like a piece of solid glass. Would be good as a reflector if you got lost in the bush actually. Covers quite a lot of hectares, this gypsum crystals.
Gypsum is a common mineral. It's sedimentary and created from evaporating seawater under dry, arid conditions. Well, the conditions are certainly ideal out here. We see the products of gypsum in our everyday life all the time. It's used in paint, cement, and the most common form as plasterboard on walls in houses. Gypsum has been used for centuries, and when burnt, it can be ground down to a fine powder to make plaster of Paris. Who would have thought anything useful could come out of this most barren of areas? The landscape here is incredible. Looks like the whole area has been razed by some cataclysmic event, like a nuclear blast. The countryside is almost devoid of colour or vegetation. We imagine we could be driving on the surface of the moon. In all my travels around Australia, I've never seen anything quite like it, the epitome of utter desolation. Apparently this is the bed of an ancient Lake Eyre. It was once 3 times larger than it is now. So is this what today's Lake Eyre could look like in a few million years' time? This desolate country continues almost until we reach the shores of the Salt Lake.
Well, we've reached Lake Eyre after that rather bumpy ride through that lunar-like landscape. This part of Australia is the driest part of Australia. And at the moment, it's the windiest part of Australia, I'm sure. You can't keep your hat on, it's blowing straight off the lake out there. It's rather ironical, in fact, because there's water in the lake. It's about 40% full, and apparently about every 8 years or so, it gets water in it. And sometimes that water will hang around for 3 to 4 years. At the moment, you can see it's rather pink out there.
The pink colour in the water is due to an algae bloom brought on by the sun heating up the water as it evaporates and becomes shallower. The evaporating water leaves some strange effects. These footprints look like they're full of snow, until I touch the thin, fragile crust of salt, which is floating on water in the depression left by someone's shoe. In a million years or so, these footprints may be fossilised into the lake bed and could be of intense interest to future archaeologists. Today, they just scar the surface of the lake shore. This is a large salt flake or salt crystal, created as the water evaporated. It's amazing what nature can do. The water in the lake is only about 2 metres deep. Here on the shoreline, it's only centimetres deep, and like that for about 100 metres out from the edge. Because the lake bed is so flat, the strong wind is blowing the water ashore, making it appear as if the tide's coming in. It's moving quickly enough to wet my feet, so it's time to find a drier spot. You can't get much drier than on the sandy dunes fronting the lake, but even here there is life. Hardy plants cling to the sand as a constant wind blows them, scribing fascinating patterns. We're moving further around the lake to see if we can find a large expanse of salt. After all, Lake Eyre is supposed to be a dry salt lake. That's why Englishman Donald Campbell chose Lake Eyre for his world land speed record attempt in 1964. The salt lake was dry and flat, ideal for Campbell's futuristic car called Bluebird. It streaked across the salt flats at an incredible 650 kilometres an hour, creating a new world record.
Definitely need your sunnies on out here. This salt's very, very glary, and it's all around us. Salt here is fairly hard actually. It's been wet the last week or two, but it's still quite thick and reasonably hard.
These hollow salt-encrusted tunnels pattern the lake's surface. They've been created when salt crystals dried on foam, whipped up by the wind at the water's edge.
It's about 10 millimetres thick. Not very thick actually.
In the middle of the lake, the salt is up to 6 metres thick.
Definitely salt.
This brings back memories. I first tasted the salt on Lake Eyre back in 1961, on my very first outback travels. Naively following a service station road map, along with my brother Mal and a school friend Keith Davey, I set out in January 1961 to drive to Central Australia. We followed roughly the route Margie and I are taking now. Midsummer was a stupid time to travel out here. We were caught in floods in the middle of a drought and got hopelessly lost near Lake Eyre, with only our service station map to guide us. By some stroke of luck, we found the right track out, and I filmed the biggest Perentie lizard I've ever seen. This lizard was over 2 metres long, and just take a look at the length of his tongue. We eventually arrived at Mallura in the station. Elliot Price, the station owner, pointed us in the right direction to Lake Eyre. This is the southern route to Lake Eyre, and just as dry and desolate as the country we've just seen, except it's more like a sandy desert. Once at the lake edge, I drove straight onto the surface, thinking this is a four-wheel drive, it can go anywhere. Keith walked in front to check the ground. It was my first four-wheel drive. With only 3 weeks practice at home, I decided we would tackle a trip to the harshest region of Australia. Driving on the lake could have been a real disaster. Fortunately, I backed out before becoming hopelessly bogged. Determined to see some salt, we set out on foot to walk 5 or 6 kilometres through soft, salt-encrusted mud to the salt flats of the lake proper. We could have easily perished in the heat, but I got to taste the salt of Lake Eyre and survived to do it again. We did all the wrong things, but these, my own tracks of the past, gave me a passion to travel all over the countryside, and I'm still doing it and still loving it. We certainly live in an incredible country. It's taken all day for us to explore the area. We've now driven far enough back from the lake to find a campsite out of the incessant wind. With some protection from small bushes in a dry creek, we settled down for a very isolated overnight camp in a very remote spot on the map of Australia. Day 7 and we're back on the Oodnadatta Track. With all the birds overhead, it could be Birdsville. But no, it's William Creek, and it's always been a small township with a school, a few houses, and a pub that's nearly as famous as the Birdsville pub. It can get pretty busy here, and it pays to give way to kids on motorbikes and aeroplanes in the main street. Once you've dodged the kids and planes, you need to pop into the old hotel for a cold drink. Other visitors seem to have left most of their clothes hanging from the ceiling, and the publican is busy extracting a very unhappy galah that's fallen down the chimney into the pot-belly heater.
Did you bite your finger? Yeah, of course. I mean, wouldn't you if you had a hand like that coming up your bottom?
Just another day in the William Creek Hotel. Remember Talc Alf and his golf trophy? It's for a golf benefit day for the Flying Doctor service that's to be held here at William Creek. The hotel has a tradition of raising money for the Flying Doctor, and donations can be stuck to the ceiling for collection later. Peter has noticed a big change in travellers' attitudes over his years in the pub.
The good part is now people are starting to slow down a bit. It used to be that we've done the Oodnadatta Track, we've done the Gypsum Crystals.
Yeah, big deal. We've
Yeah,
done it.
that's
We've
right.
seen nothing on the way.
Yeah, and that's what we're kind of trying to get them to do, is to actually slow down, look at all the ruins, because I mean you've got peak ruins up the track, and you can spend a couple of days just getting from here to Coward Springs. So it's a really good idea. Yeah. At the moment, the lake being full, it's brilliant because we only get water in the lake about once every, say, 10 years. At the moment, it's a comparable level to 1984 because it's just so rare to have water in it. It's brilliant.
Another good way to see Lake Eyre is by aeroplane. We're going to fly out there right now. Taxiing down the main street in a plane is really a different experience. And where else in the world could you do this without being arrested? From the air, William Creek Township looks even smaller. And when the Ghan stopped running, everyone predicted William Creek would die. But today it's thriving as a mecca for four-wheel drive enthusiasts. And a lot of them take a flight out to Lake Eyre for a different view of Australia's largest lake. We're getting a good view of the desolate country we drove through with its colourless landscape. From up here we can see what a huge area it covers. It's just as if a bushfire's been through. The salt and mud, along with the pink water at the lake edge, reminds me of partly mixed paints on an artist's palette. It's an incredible panorama, unlike anything we saw on the ground. With the door open for filming, Margie's copping all the wind in the back and getting a free blow dry. We're now over the middle of the lake, and the dried salt patches look like frozen waves on a pink ocean. It's a rarely seen phenomena and very photogenic. In the distance you could be forgiven for thinking this is a large expanse of ice, but that's what the whole lake normally looks like, flat and white. The combined areas of Lake Eyre North and South are 9,330 square kilometres, making it the biggest lake in Australia. Explorer Edward John Eyre discovered the lake in 1840, and it carries his name, even though he placed little importance on the salt lake and just considered it to be a hindrance that blocked exploration to the north. Other explorers followed and found a route north past the lake, and it's in their tracks of the past that we're now going. We're about halfway along our tracks of the past, and we're at Edward Creek siding, and I'm standing on top of one of the old water softeners which provided saline-free water for the boilers of the old Ghan trains. Underground spring water that made exploration possible also made the railway possible, but the steam train's boilers couldn't cope with the mineral-laden water, so each siding was equipped with a Kanyaka water softener and an elevated storage tank. Sidings like this were placed about 40 kilometres apart all along the Ghan line. Most are derelict now, and only a curiosity to outback travellers like us. A major part of Australia's heritage is gradually disappearing. Edward Creek siding is just north of William Creek, so we still have a long way to go to Alice Springs. We're driving along the Oodnadatta Track at the moment. It's between William Creek and Oodnadatta. It does go on from there, but we're not going that direction after Oodnadatta. The road here is quite good. It's a gravel road. It's a slow road. You don't want to go too fast on these roads out here, because the rocks can cut into your tyres. You're best to stick around about the 80k, and that way you don't get the rock going through the tyre and blowing it out. A lot of things to see along the road here, a lot of historical places along the side of the road, so don't forget to stop and look at them. We'll show you some of those as we get along. Most vehicles travelling the track are four-wheel drives, and many are towing camper trailers. And this is the first car we've seen in 4 days. We've just turned east on this side track to visit the Peak Hill Ruins. The track out to the Peak Hill Ruins is definitely four-wheel drive only. You have to be very careful out here. There are some sections you can get through in a two-wheel drive if you're a careful driver, but most of it is very rough and rocky, and you need the height of a four-wheel drive. Our destination is in the Peak and Denison Ranges alongside Peak Creek. We've driven about 20k off the Oodnadatta Track between William Creek and Oodnadatta to find these old ruins. They're actually the ruins of the repeater station for the overland telegraph line. This is all that remains of the buildings, and it's one of only 3 in South Australia that still remain standing. It's a very historic site. Peak Station, a pastoral property, was established in 1863 and was the furthest northern outpost of settlement in South Australia. And during construction of the telegraph line, Peak Station was used as a supply depot, then later it became a repeater station. To speed up communications between England and Australia, construction began in 1870. 36,000 poles were erected, carrying an iron wire between Port Augusta and Darwin, as well as a repeater station every 250 kilometres. All this was completed in the amazing short time of 18 months. In its first 12 months of operation, the line carried 4,000 telegrams. Repeater stations like the one here at Peak boosted the signal to ensure the telegraphic messages reached their destination, and Australia was no longer isolated from the rest of the world. Either this is a very low window, or they were very short people back then. We have no way of checking that out. The only residents now are noisy cockies and 2 souls who died at the Peak and now lay at rest on a hill overlooking the ruins. We can only wonder at the hardships that were endured in this harsh land in order to send messages across a continent and beyond. Communication and transport opened up the vast inland of Australia, and the railway was the main artery that supplied the heart of the continent with its lifeblood of goods and people. You've got to be careful where you tread there, it's about 12 metres down at the bottom. This is the Algebuckina Bridge. It crosses the Neales River. It's the longest bridge in South Australia. It's 578 metres long and it was built in 1889. It's a long way across to the other side. And there is no truth to the rumour that the Algebuckina Bridge was built to cross the Marree River and that an engineering mistake made it unusable. This bush tale has been told around many a campfire. It was actually built to replace a low-level crossing that was prone to flooding in wet seasons. Crossing the bridge on foot is an awesome experience. You have to watch your feet all the time so as not to miss one of the sleepers. The height of the bridge makes it worthwhile. You get a different perspective of the Neales River from up here. One previous crossing of the bridge ended in disaster. This car wreck on the southern side is a result of a driver trying to cross a flooded river by driving over the bridge, a common practice in the bush. An oncoming train hit the car head-on, pushing it off the bridge. The driver jumped out and clung to the outer railing and was unharmed. His dog wasn't so lucky. He fell into the flooded river and drowned. The last train crossed the Algebuckina Bridge in 1981. Now it's an isolated monument to the old Ghan. It's a bridge to nowhere and a talking point for travellers along the Oodnadatta Track.
Australia could be called a continent of birds, with over 700 species recorded, making it a bird watcher's paradise. And out here in the outback, the most obvious birds are the parrots. They're always around where there's a waterhole. We're just down from the Algebuckina Bridge on a waterhole on the Neales River, and here it's that time of the year when all the birds are making out like lovebirds. You can get a lot of pleasure observing birds on your travels, and it pays to take a pocket-sized field guide to help identify them. Some are easy, like the Pinkalar, and everyone knows the budgerigar, but a lot of people don't realise they're a native bird. Budgerigars are one of Australia's smallest parrots and often seen in large flocks in the outback, but today we're observing just one pair. The green and yellow colouring is a budgerigar's natural colour. Other colours seen in captivity are from selected breeding. It's time for a bit of a scratch all round. Little corellas are common around waterholes, and their shrieking often makes some unwelcome visitors to a quiet campsite. But I must admit, I reckon they give the campsite a real Australian atmosphere. Take a look at this. Who's observing who? He's probably thinking, look at that pair down there. What do they think they look like? Staring into that silly black thing on 3 sticks? Oodnadatta is probably most famous for its pink roadhouse, which you can't miss as you drive into town. Even though everything that's in the pink needs a new coat of paint, nearly every traveller stops to take photos and get topped up with food, fuel and track information. The publicity-conscious owners are more than likely the reason that Oodnadatta is so well known to travellers all over the countryside. And just when we think it's safe to have a quiet hamburger, the place is alive with 4-wheel drives and the shop is packed. So we decide it's time to investigate a quiet street off the main drag and see why Oodnadatta is really here. Oodnadatta was a railway town from 1891 to 1981, and this is the railway station area, with only a few railway items left to remind us it was once the hub of the town. While Margie checks out the mechanics of the station crane, I investigate the museum that's housed in the old station. This comprehensive display is well worth a visit. It draws your mind back to the days of hard work and steam trains. Good artesian water was found here, and that was necessary for the steam engines. These old photos in the museum show the difficulty in building a railway line through vast, unforgiving country. In 1891, a narrow gauge line was extended north from Marree to Oodnadatta, making the town the end of the line. Oodnadatta then became the inland's most northern service centre, with trainloads of goods and passengers arriving at regular intervals. This is what the station looked like in 1905. It was a busy place, with passengers disembarking on arrival
at this remote outpost of civilization. It's not so busy today, and casual travellers passing through the town can miss the railway station if they don't make the effort to seek it out. Oodnadatta was a major staging post for the outback. Goods were unloaded from steam trains and reloaded onto camel trains for further transport to distant properties and settlements as far north as Alice Springs. Up to 400 camels could be in the town at any one time, loading up with supplies. And what a sight the teams made on their routes north. The rail line was extended to Alice Springs in 1928, and the camels were no longer needed. But there are some camels in Oodnadatta today, and the local kids are only too keen to tell us their names.
This is Naru. This is Fortunate. And that is Ikkis. North Runnel. This one here. And that's what is Camel. And that's how. Naru is the strongest. One more.
Come on, jump on.
Steve owns the camels, and this wagon is his own version of a caravan. He drove the camels and wagon down from Alice Springs, and now he's king of the kids in Oodnadatta. They all want rides on the wagon. I'm going along on this ride as well, and Steve tells me one of the camels escaped recently during a rainstorm.
He came back about 2 weeks later. He was just caked in it. He's lost a fair bit of condition. Found him 50 kilometres up the road.
Really?
Yeah.
The camels are happy to be back, and Steve's happy to give the local kids a ride when he comes into town. And by the way, if you think it's safe to drink and drive at Oodnadatta, think again. Steve was breathalyzed recently driving the Camel Wagon. How things have changed for Oodnadatta since the trains came and subsequently left in 1981. Tourism is the town's main source of income today, as four-wheel drive travellers pass through on their own journeys of discovery. Oodnadatta is Aboriginal for flower of the mulga, which by the way is yellow, so maybe next time they paint the roadhouse it should look like this. And on that note, it's probably time to leave town. The Oodnadatta Track goes west to connect with the sealed Stewart Highway to Alice Springs. We turn off north to continue following the tracks of the past. The track soon narrows and deteriorates to rough gravel and soft sand.
We're driving across Fogarty's clay pan. Big clay pan on the way out to Dalhousie Springs.
This clay pan was named after Fogarty, who was one of the first shopkeepers in Oodnadatta and Alice Springs. Before the railway connected to Alice Springs, he transported goods by camel between his two shops in the towns that are over 500 kilometres apart. That's what I call real business enterprise. This clay pan's about 5 kilometres wide and would be a real clay bog after rain. The country is quite dry, even though it did rain here a few weeks ago, which has prompted the growth of carpets of parakelia plants, a low-growing herb with fleshy leaves. Each flower lasts for just 1 day. It's succeeded by another, so that flowering continues over several months. The wildflower most travellers want to see is the spectacular Sturt desert pea. This plastic-looking flower is the floral emblem of South Australia and was one of the first Australian wildflowers collected by Europeans. It was recorded in 1699 by William Dampier and was subsequently named after explorer Charles Sturt. Before you head up to Dalhousie Springs, you need to purchase a Desert Parks Pass for South Australia. You can get them at the roadhouses along the way, and in the pack you get a handbook, half a dozen really good little maps, some great information, and also a sticker to show you've paid your way into the park. It lasts for 12 months. Good maps are a necessity on a trip like this, as we're in very remote country. This route to Dalhousie Springs is known as the Paderka Track. The road to Paderka is reputed to be one of the roughest in the area. On the map here it shows it's not maintained at all. It's very, very rocky, so drive very slowly, be very careful, because these stones here can slash your tyres very, very easily. The Paderka Track negotiates extremely rocky terrain, with vast expanses of flat rocky tablelands, often crisscrossed with dry washed out gullies crossing the track. This is slow going, and it pays to keep a regular eye on your map and distances. Travellers along this track have a saying: if every person stopped and removed some rocks from the track, it would still never be rock-free. The shiny brown rocks and stones are coated in what's commonly called desert varnish. The rocks have a coating of various oxides, mostly iron, and the action of winds over a long period of time has polished the surface, giving the rocks a brown, shiny, varnished look. Even here we see plant life. Paper dry flowers called billy buttons take root and hang on in the prevailing desert winds. If we think it's a harsh area for flowers, how'd you like to live here? It's hard to imagine a more inhospitable looking spot to live and work. Bidurka siding must have been one of the loneliest places on the old Ghan line. There's not much left today, and not even a trace of the old railway line. About 20 kilometres along the track, we're entering the Wigerin National Park, and the country changes to white sand. Quite a contrast from the red stony desert.
These are the ruins of Dalhousie Station. This area here was once a major depot for the camel teams that headed up to the centre, taking supplies through to the pastoralists up there. They actually camped here and made this a major depot, and it's thought that they actually planted all these date palms around here.
Ned Baggett purchased the lease of Dalhousie in 1872, after he had contracted and built the southern section of the overland telegraph line. This homestead was built in 1885 and abandoned in 1925. The South Australian government purchased leases of 7,769 square kilometres in 1984 and created Wigerin National Park. As we approach Dalhousie Springs, we can't help but notice the distinct green-capped mounds in the distance. Each blob of green denotes a mound spring in this valley of springs. 60 springs in all create mini oases in one of the most arid parts of Australia.
Well, this is Dalhousie Springs, and the water in here is just wonderful. Don't know what the temperature is, but it's just like a warm bath. And there's acres and acres of this water around here. What an oasis in the desert.
The main pool is 150 metres long and 40 metres wide. It's fed by a spring that gushes out water at about 12 million litres per day. Water from the springs comes from the Great Artesian Basin. This water probably fell as rain in Queensland 2 million years ago. It's taken that long to seep down here and be forced up under pressure to see the light of day again, bringing life to plants and animals thousands of kilometres from where it first fell to earth. Isn't that just amazing? The camping area at Dalhousie is right beside the main pool, and it's often full of four-wheel drive travellers like us that are here to marvel at this oasis in the desert. Exploring the mound springs, I come across a solar-powered flow meter. That's one of many monitoring the outflow of various springs in the Dalhousie system. Modern technology helping to trace a most ancient water source. The springs provided a haven for the Aboriginals of the area, offering abundant water and a reliable food source. Today, it offers the traveller a welcome break from the dry desert, which we're soon reminded of as we drive further north towards the Northern Territory border. This long section of bull dust has been created by numerous four-wheel drives visiting the region during the winter months. It's now late October and starting to get very hot as we proceed further north. The country changes as we approach the Emery Range. We've been travelling across low sandy country and we've reached what's known as the Breakaways, where the track is taking us up to a different level of landform. Weathering at the edge of the higher landform causes large chunks of rock to break away, falling and adding to the sloping debris below. This is the gate from South Australia's Big Paddock to the Northern Territory's Big Paddock. As a border crossing, it doesn't look much, does it?
Well, we've just crossed the border into the Northern Territory. We're on our way to Oodnadatta Station, which is right on the edge of the Simpson Desert. And the last time I was there was in 1966 when we crossed the Simpson Desert. The track in here apparently is four-wheel drive only, or a little bit rough, but so far it's been pretty good. But we'll see how we go.
It's 39 degrees outside, but it's not too bad. It's a dry heat, so you can handle it.
We're now in red centre country, which looks quite different to where we've been. This is cattle country. The national park ends at the border.
So far the road to Oodnadatta is better than the road we went into Dalhousie Springs. Not so much traffic uses this road, and it makes a big difference. All the traffic give a lot of corrugations, and this is a lot better.
Better until I decide to drive off the track to find a quiet campsite. A hidden rabbit hole catches us unaware. And it does help if you're in four-wheel drive, and better still if you lock the front hubs in as well. Anyone can forget sometimes. At least we find a nice flat area to camp, and not too soon as it turns out. Got a hole in the tyre of that rocky road back there. It's put a bit of a hole through the tread here, so I'm going to fix it if I can with this repair kit. That's the trouble with those rough rocky roads. You try and miss as many as you can, but you only need one little tiny one, and it's gone between the tread and made a little hole. Hardly see it, you just hear it hissing out. I've got to push this through the hole to clean the hole out. Next, you thread the really sticky plug through the hand-sized needle and force it right into the hole. And it helps if you use some rubber glue as well. Okay, now we pump it up. See what happens, and hopefully it'll hold the air. Margie, turn the pump on, please. It's wise to have a good air pump fitted when you're in remote and sandy areas. It pumps your tyres up in a few minutes. Early morning and a willy-willy wakes us as it blows dust through our camp. Before we move on, we're looking around for small lizards and any other wildlife that would look good on the video. Instead, we're seeing stones that are totally different to anything we've seen in the last few days. It appears we've accidentally stumbled upon an old Aboriginal campsite a long way off the track. These stones have definitely been brought into the area, and some are partially buried in the loose sand. It makes us wonder how long they've been laying here, and who last used them. It's a treasure trove of ancient artefacts. We found two good examples of grindstones amongst the artefacts we found. This is a large one, and we've got a small one there. The large one was found in two parts, and they were quite separate when we found them, which probably meant that they were abandoned when they left camp because they were already broken. You can see how it fits into there really neatly. This is the grinding implement. The grindstone section is made of sandstone, and this is a much harder stone which has been ground on three sides, as you can see, very flat there. It's been used for many, many years. What they do, the women would go and gather some seed from the grasses, put it onto the base grindstone and rub it with the harder rock. Turn it into a flour, they'd mix water with it and eat it as a paste, or they could cook it and make a damper out of it. Over here, our second grindstone, in fact, is a portable grindstone that they'd take on walkabout. They'd carry these in their dilly bags. This part here is also sandstone, and that's also a harder rock that would have been used in the same manner to grind up the flour while they're out in camp. These grindstones probably came from the Flinders Ranges because they had a grindstone quarry down there, and those grindstones were traded with other Aboriginal groups from various areas up north. That's probably how they got up this way. We've also found some spear points and flint cutting implements. These here are spear points, or shaped like spear points. The way they'd make those is they'd get a nucleus like that, they'd get another rock, and they'd crack off the pieces or flake them off and end up with these spear points here, or cutting implements. Then they'd finely shape those so they had a very sharp edge. These ones here have got quite a sharp edge. Some of these smaller ones are quite finely chipped. That one's a bit of quartz. That there would probably been a scraper, or used to skin an animal or scrape back the flesh. That one is very sharp along the edge there. You could cut yourself on that. These are real Stone Age implements. And remember, if you do find any of these in your travels out the bush, you can't take them with you. It's illegal. You have to leave them here. We're leaving these here because this is a long way off the track, and it's very doubtful that anybody would find them and take them away. These artefacts would have been used by an ancient tribe that are now part of the tracks of the past. The 90-kilometre track from the border to Old Oodnadatta Homestead varies by the hour, from heavily timbered to soft bull dust. It's very interesting country, as we find out when we stop to film some finches that are busy in a dead tree. Just nearby we see a whistling kite's nest high up in a desert oak. One young bird is out of the nest and sitting precariously in a forked branch. Another is still in the nest, and a third youngster huddles on the sand, pretending that he's invisible. He's ventured too far and fallen to the ground. As we wonder how we can help, a parent bird arrives with a small lizard for the youngsters. Seemingly oblivious to our presence, she calls out and eventually flies to the nest. The eager baby in the nest misses out on lunch, as Mum is distracted by the wayward kite that's grounded and running into the grass. She's soon off to the rescue, and this is the last we see of them, perched in a dead tree. We're now in the Simpson Desert, a red sea of sand that covers 150,000 square kilometres.
You may have wondered why the sand in Central Australia is red. Well, what it is, the particles of sand are coated in an iron oxide stain. You'll find redder sand in areas where it's drier because it doesn't get as much water. In fact, if you do put the red sand in some water, you can wash it off.
Someone who knows all about that red sand lives in it, right here at Old Oodnadatta Homestead. Old Oodnadatta was built back in 1922 by cattleman George McDill for his new bride. It's 20 kilometres into the Simpson Desert, and the homestead today looks just like it did in 1922. Corrugated iron outside and in, making it a classic early Australian bush design. It's like stepping back in time. It's been lovingly restored by Molly Clark, a true pioneer woman of the outback, with a dry sense of humour.
If that many jolly fuckers with me flatting around, it's going to be like the Aboriginals are going to say, right, $2 every photo.
Molly doesn't like all the attention and reluctantly allows me this quick shot, for free. Travellers are welcome here, and Molly lets you walk through her home to feel the true spirit of the bush. It's a living museum with Molly's treasures on display. Even inside, the temperature today is 35 degrees and it feels cool. Molly claims she hasn't done much to restore Old Oodnadatta. I was last here in 1966 and this is what the buildings looked like then. Today they're restored back to original, and it shows travellers that life wasn't meant to be easy for pioneers of the remote outback. Old Oodnadatta today is a credit to the efforts of a remarkable woman. Here is a unique tourist venture that offers a place to stay and see how the outback was before it became easily accessible by today's four-wheel drive travellers. We leave Molly Clark to drive north 50 kilometres to a place named after her late husband.
Behind me here is one of Australia's rarest trees. It's called Acacia puce, or waddy tree. It was called waddy tree because the Aborigines used to make fighting sticks from the timber because it was so hard. In fact, it's Australia's hardest timber. And this is a waddy stick. It was used by Aboriginals to kill small animals such as lizards. It was also a great hunting and fighting weapon. And in the hands of a skilled hunter, it could kill a kangaroo on the run if it was thrown at close range.
Waddy trees are a remnant of the Ice Age, and they take about 4,000 to 5,000 years to grow to full maturity. Driving west through cattle country, it's about 90 kilometres to the Finke River crossing on the old Ghan line. This dry sandy riverbed can be difficult to cross with soft sand for hundreds of metres. Today it's relatively easy, but it's impossible when the Finke is in flood. In 1966 it was like this. The local kids hadn't seen water in the Finke in 8 years of drought. It was fun. And the Ghan tram was able to cross the flooded river by a low-level bridge that itself flooded over in heavier rains. The train's now long gone, and so is the bridge. From here, the Finke Track heads due north, and it's very bumpy. It's definitely four-wheel drive only.
Riding a roller coaster.
We're following the old Ghan line from Finke through to Alice Springs. All that's left of it now is a lot of rotten sleepers, which you can see along the back here. We found this set of wheels, and there's millions of these spikes laying around. Bit of metal here and there, and that's it. That's all that's left of the old Ghan line. Along the way through to Alice Springs, we're going to take a look at Chambers Pillar. And I've just figured out why these wheels are still here. Imagine trying to souvenir these. You'd need a semi-trailer.
This track is used for the annual Finke Desert Race. The motorbikes, four-wheel drives and dune buggies have created the sand humps as they race the clock from Alice Springs to Finke and back. The weather has taken a turn for the worse as we continue our way slowly along the bumpy track. The desert wildflowers make a colourful diversion and take our mind off the steady rain. We don't even stop at the old siding ruins. We're eager to get as far north as we can along the track before we get flooded in. It's over 160 kilometres from Finke to Chambers Pillar, and it's slow going in the sand and mud.
Well, we've had to pull up and camp because it's getting too dark, the road's getting a bit muddy and it's still raining. I just hope we're only here for one night. I mean, if it rains overnight, we could be here for more. Miserable cold after yesterday. 39 degrees in the shade yesterday, now it's about 15. Really cold.
When the weather's like this, we really appreciate the frozen meals Margie prepared at home. They're so easy to heat up.
One thing I hate about camping is when you're camping in the rain. Last night it rained all night and it's very, very wet out there. I just hope we can get down the track. But first off, the worst part, packing up in the rain. I'm dressed for the occasion, so I better get going. We're just following the old Ghan track because it's easier than going along the other part of the track. I think the other bit might be a bit boggy, so we're going to follow the lines here. The only thing is you've got to be careful of the spikes on the ground. A lot of corrugations here as well. We're going to go slow down here, there's big bog brows down there though.
Driving along the built-up old railway line turns out to be so rough that we decide to take our chances on the water-covered track. Over 50 millimetres of rain fell overnight, and the Finke Track is more like the Finke River. The country here is so flat, the water covers it like a huge lake with a running watercourse down the centre of the track. In situations like this, never leave the track, even if it's totally covered in water. At least the ground under the water has been compacted by vehicles over a long period of time. The wet country on either side of the track is rain-soaked and waterlogged, creating bottomless mud and soggy sand. So the rule is, stick to the track if at all possible.
Well, we've just driven 3 hours through a lot of water and a lot of mud. It's now eased up, stopped raining for a few minutes so we can get the camera out. We're going to have to stay here for a night because we can't get through to Chambers Pillar. The road's far too wet. There's a lot of creeks ahead of us and they're quite deep. So we're going to have to sit here and sit it out. It's rather ironical about all this rain because we're following the Ghan line, and in fact the reason the Ghan line was moved was because of the rain. The rain used to come through here and wash out all the tracks and the bridges. So they've moved the Ghan line over to the west a fair way. And here we are in the same situation, flooded out.
Rodinga siding turns out to be our campsite for day 13 of our trek. The rain stops for 24 hours, but the road to Chambers Pillar is still awash with water. We've left the Ghan line to head west on a better made road, which still looks more like a river than a road. And much to our surprise, this river is dry sand and more like a road than a river. We're now in much higher country, on a gravel road that flanks the rocky Charlotte Range. A four-wheel drive track climbs a range where we get a view of our day's destination.
It's easy to see why the early explorers and travellers used Chambers Pillar as a reference point to guide them through the desert here. We're 13 k's away and you can still see it quite plainly in the distance. It stands out like a sentinel in the desert.
A stony track leads us down the western side of the range and into sandhill country. The rain has compacted the bright red sandhills, making the last 13 kilometres an easy run into Chambers Pillar Historical Reserve, but it's still definitely four-wheel drive only. We're soon surrounded by picture postcard scenery, with our campsite between Chambers Pillar and the weathered sandstone formation known as Castle Rock. Chambers Pillar dominates the skyline, and we're drawn to it like a magnet. Chambers Pillar was discovered by John McDowell Stewart in 1860 on one of his Central Australian expeditions. He named it Chambers Pillar after one of the financiers of his expedition. It's actually a sandstone mesa, very weathered, and it's 50 metres high. Stewart was the first explorer to see this haunting column of rock. He described it as a remarkable hill, somewhat like a locomotive engine with its funnel. Whereas explorer Ernest Giles, passing here in 1872, noted that it would be unique in Australia, and it is not likely that any future explorer will ever discover so singular a monument to immortalise either himself or his patron. Definitely looks big when you're standing right underneath this part of it here. This is the actual pillar section. There's lots of names carved in the rock here. Some are historic and some are vandals. The historical ones, check them out. Explorers, pastoralists and early pioneers have left their names carved into the soft sandstone. The Hayes family settled in the region to become well-known pastoralists, with some of their descendants still living in Central Australia. Swan was a magistrate, Wallace a pastoralist, Basedow an anthropologist, and Collins an expedition cook. These names and others read like a who's who of Central Australian pioneers. John Ross, whose name is at the opposite end of the pillar, was a bushman explorer who surveyed the route for the overland telegraph line. It's now an offence to carve your name here, and there's a hefty fine involved. Chambers Pillar is definitely one of Central Australia's great natural features. If you get the chance, come out here one day. It's well worth a drive. Most travellers just explore Chambers Pillar, but it's well worth a walk in the opposite direction to see some equally interesting formations, such as Castle Rock. And don't miss this other fascinating nameless pillar, not far away. In another million years or so, this is probably what Chambers Pillar is going to look like. The erosions caused a hole to form right through the top of the pillar there. The iron crust that has protected Chambers Pillar for so long has eroded here. The weather has taken its toll, creating a balancing act of crumbling 400 million year old sandstone. Explorer Stewart described these formations as nothing so much as a number of old castles in ruins. But what awe-inspiring features they make in a spectacular desert landscape. Enhanced by a setting sun, the colours change to a burning red, leaving an indelible impression in our minds. It makes us wonder how many tracks of the past crossed here. Day 15, and we're on the road to Alice Springs. It's sandy and wide, making the remaining puddles easy to bypass. Colourful wildflowers, commonly called bird flowers, attract our attention as we drive past the iron-coloured Uramina Range. It's well worth stopping at the Wanninga Conservation Reserve, 40 kilometres south of Alice Springs. The clay pan here fills with water after rain, and it's thought it provided permanent water thousands of years ago for Aboriginal tribes that lived here and left their mark on many of the sandstone rocks in the area. These petroglyphs or rock engravings are thought to be at least 30,000 years old. Petroglyphs were used to record rituals and important events, as well as detailing areas for nomadic hunters to find game and water. It's time for us to leave these permanent tracks of the past and drive on to Alice Springs. We know we're nearly there. We're stopped by the old Ghan train just returning from a tourist run. The camel teams and railway led the way in opening up the outback. But when the newfangled automobile arrived, it pushed the limits even further, making life a lot easier for remote settlers to commute from railheads to their often distant properties. The car soon became king of the outback, and today's four-wheel drives make life easy when travelling the area. After so long in the bush, the traffic in Alice Springs seems positively chaotic, and we seem to be flashing along dodging cars and pedestrians, especially at 10 times normal speed. Thankfully, it's just an illusion. After our quick tour of the town, we head for Anzac Hill to take in a classic view of Alice Springs. Cliche or not, you just have to do it. Alice Springs is here because all those tracks of the past came by this way. A small town sprung up, and look at it today, a huge tourist mecca with a population of around 26,000. Our travels along the tracks of the past end here at Alice Springs. It's taken us 15 days to get here, and what a fascinating trip it's been. We've travelled 2,490 kilometres, and a lot of that's been in four-wheel drive. We've used 355 litres of diesel, and all that remains to be done now is take a ride on the old Ghan Railway. So let's go. The famous old Ghan train is operated by the Ghan Preservation Society, and the train takes passenger runs on a regular basis out of Stewart Station on the outskirts of Alice Springs. The Society is a voluntary group of enthusiasts that fought to preserve a section of the old narrow gauge line. A diesel loco hauls the rolling stock today, but the Society does have a fully restored steam engine that operates in busier times. The train takes passengers on a 20-kilometre round trip, passing through typical Central Australian terrain that made up the type of country the original Ghan travelled through. The plush bar car from the original Ghan rolling stock retains its original charm and character. It's now named Rumballara. This is a real good one. This is one of the originals, isn't it?
Yes, just the Rumballara, of course, was one of the stopping places. We've got the lead light windows when we were doing it up, my husband and I did. We got the niece to do the lead lights with the rainbow, because that's what Rumballara means in Aboriginal.
The popular flat-top wagon is a great vantage point to view the countryside and see some remnants of the old overland telegraph line. I can't think of a better way to end our travels along the tracks of the past. This is really great. Don't forget to join us next time we travel all over the countryside.